YouTube and stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
then it's there we go.
Okay, now we can go.
So it's yours, Representative Haddad. I don't
Thank
see
you.
Senator Flexer, so
Yeah, I think she's planning on joining online soon. I apologize I'm late, but you sent me a spreadsheet just, that I started looking at right before the meeting started, and I took out my calculator, and that's always a mistake. So, um, so you very kindly answered a bunch of questions. I think it probably makes sense for us to just to run through those questions, your answers to those questions as quickly as we can, and then we'll see if we have any additional time left over for any additional questions. The first question I think was around how tuition increases impact enrollment. You cited a lot of studies here that I hadn't seen before, so you want to give us the sort of skinny version of that, and we can ask members if they have any additional questions.
Sure. So I'll give it a poke, and then if I don't perfectly represent it, then I think our finance experts in Melatina and Carrie and Lloyd will be joining us in a little bit. Can kind of fill in the blanks or correct me. But I think the short story, Representative and committee, is that even with the increases in tuition, it doesn't seem, according to these analyses, that there would be a overall detrimental impact to enrollment. Obviously, depending on which calculation you utilize, there would be some impact to the enrollment. I'm not saying it doesn't impact the enrollment at all, but it would not put us into the red when we do that kind of juxtaposition of what happens when.
Yeah, the data is very helpful. I mean, I think I asked a question like this. I was just trying to sort of ascertain how much of a drop off there might be, and it's marginal, I guess, according to these studies. But it's not zero. It's not certainly not enough to make you go in the red. I didn't think that would be the response, but I just wanted to sort of see what the relationship was.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I don't have these sheets. I just went thumbing through my
Resend them.
Please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the administrator sent them this morning, I think.
Oh, I was a mess.
So I gather it is my.
Yes, I was. Okay.
And so there's a lot of information on the sheets. If after Representative Walker gets a chance to look at it, we can come back to this. But I'll ask if there's any other questions about how tuition might impact enrollment. If not, then we can go on to the next question, which I think was really just about seeing the tuition increase breakdown by institution and subgroup. I think that refers to another spreadsheet that you had. I don't know if you have the ability to share screen. I think if you wanted to do that too, but this just, I actually was surprised to see that there was, I mean, it's not remarkably different between institutions, CSUs, but I guess I just wasn't, hadn't laid my eyes on the actual tuition rate by institution for a while, but it varies by, almost $1,000 from institution to institution. That tuition increase, is it made on a system-wide basis, or is that decision around the rate of tuition made at a campus level?
So the tuition increases for the institutions should be ubiquitous, right? The tuition itself, it's the fees where we have some differential by institution. But the tuition itself, whether it's CT State or it's the CS or our universities, should be relatively straightforward. So I see Lloyd has joined us, but I don't know if did you want further clarity, or I don't know if I would call that clarity. Did you want more than that, Representative Haddad?
No, I was looking for the reason why it would be, $1,000 higher at Eastern than at Central, but I guess it's, why would the maybe you could just tell me, like, it might be a capital fee or something like, a bond for that you might be paying off with revenues or something like that. What are the differences in the fees? What explains the differences in the fees between institutions?
Sure. So, Lloyd, if you can, would you go a little deeper in that explanation than I did? Because I can only really cover the macro.
Yeah, I've been with the system, Representative Haddad, for 6 months, so I won't be able to give you a detailed answer, but I suspect that there was a time before sort of the modern organization of the system office where they had independent authority to set their own tuition. And so that's probably just a historical artifact.
Okay. There any other questions about that? Then you had a great, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, I'm pulling up the sheets now. Can you just explain, you said that the increase in tuition will not put you in the red, if that was what I heard? Was that what I heard?
That's correct, Representative Walker, that the increase in tuition does not end up driving students away to the point that it would hurt us. Well, it has an impact financially, but it doesn't drive us into the red, so to speak, financially, right? It's like, so it will end up marginalizing some students, according to these analyses, but it will not do so to the point that it tips us over the edge, so to speak.
And what are you, how are you using, what are you using to say that?
Yeah.
How are you making that statement?
Yeah, and apologies, we didn't get the materials
okay. That's right.
for deeper analysis. In short, there are studies that we've referenced and cited and applied some of those methodologies to our own situation that gives us a kind of a ratio of impact on our potential enrollment, depending on which side of the scale we might trend towards.
So I'm just before, when we look at the demographics of your population, I have a hard time understanding that, because the demographics of your population in reality are here because of the fact that they cannot go anywhere else because they cannot afford it.
Agreed. So, and yes.
For us to make a statement like that, it's not going to impact it. I think that's a wish and a prayer. And I don't mean to be, but it took me off when you said that, because I mean, from the students that I've met and the people that I've talked to on multiple campuses, they're doing 2 and 3 jobs as it is. Well, I don't need to get into it, but okay, I'll leave it alone.
I'll respond to that, Representative Walker, because you're right, and I apologize if I represented that as a way in insinuating that it doesn't have an impact. Of course, it does have an impact. The analysis shows that it does have an impact, and unfortunately, we have to speak in kind of again, macro broad swatches here when we're talking about a system of our size. So there certainly is an impact when you look at that kind of ratio calculation. What I was trying to say more clearly now is that the impact does not kind of mortally threaten us from a financial level, at least at this time. I think there are a confluence of factors that go into that. I think PAC, to be quite honest with you, is a very big deal when it comes to the community colleges, right? And I would also argue that the increases to federal Pell have helped to, maybe mitigate what is definitely a blow, because, you're 100% right that the students that we speak to, and even the students that we spoke to this morning during the breakfast here at CT State Three Rivers, they spoke to not just the accessibility, but it is the affordability and the ability to juggle all those things. So absolutely agree with you, and we'll be clearer in kind of presenting that information.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's go on to the next. I'm sorry, Greg, Mr. Chair.
No, I appreciate the sentiment. So I'm right with you, actually. Okay. The next item on number 3 is a breakdown of expenditures and state support. And actually, I think this is very helpful information. This is, this provides a lot of context to the committee. It makes it a little bit this, the amount of state support that we give a little less sort of arbitrary. We can see sort of how it fits in with your expenditures and stuff. And so, I had a couple of specific questions about this, but if you want to, it might be helpful to share one of the two versions that you've developed in that, I think that the two charts of this, they're on the same spreadsheet, but there's two, you presented them two different ways. One, if you want to just present what,
Sure,
Yeah,
and Dr. Blanchard can maybe do a high level walkthrough, or Representative Haddad, if you do have a specific item you want to pull out on this, we can drill into that.
No, I mean, first I just want people to sort of have a chance to digest it. I mean, unlike what appears in the state budget, right, and the governor's proposal and the documents we typically vote on, this shows that state aid. I think it's listed in line 9. State aid is that the $233 million that you list there. I would just like to ask this: is the block grant plus something? If you could clarify what's included in that number for CT State. You can see it most clearly at CT State because the CSUs that you've broken out for us for different institutions. But with CT State, when I look at the budget, the block grant is $217 million. Well, this is fiscal year 24 is $208 million. This shows 233. What's the difference between 208 and 233?
Let me see if I can help you with that, Representative Haddad. So the 233 represents the block grant for the community college of 172 million, plus $15 million in PACT, plus $6.5 million in PACT, plus some other supports that will add up to 233. I'm looking at the approved budget for House Bill 6941, $176 million plus PACT and other funds. So 176 plus the 23 million in PACT would be right around 200, plus 6.5 million, and certainly they're getting other funds that you see on the line with fringe support and other operating support. So the 233 is mainly the 176 block grant, the 23.5 in PACT money, and 6.5 million in enhanced student retentions for community college. That's 29.
Can I help you out just a little bit? Because I'm just a little confused as I'm looking at the governor's budget sheet. Probably should be looking at the OFA sheets, and I'm sorry, I'm not. Isn't the block grant for the community colleges 208?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong line. You're right. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong line.
Right. So, so the block grant plus the PACT money, that actually answers a follow-up question I had, which is where in this chart do you find listed as revenue the PACT funding? So the PACT funding is included in the line in 9 state aid. That's the block grant, the PACT money predominantly.
That's correct.
And a couple of other lines that are much smaller amounts. And then the PACT money, the distribution of the PACT money under expenditures, is that, where do I see that under expenditures? Is that other transfers and commitments, or is that under the financial aid line? Is that under line 17, or is it under line 20?
So it would be in every line, because the resources would be used for all expenditures to the extent that they're needed. So we wouldn't be able to say which of the PACT dollars pay for salaries, which of the PACT dollars paid for other expenditure lines. It's just a revenue source that gets spread, that gets used for all operating costs at CT State.
The PACT line is, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit confused.
Okay, so you're asking about PACT.
Right.
We've already agreed that the $233 million.
which is a scholarship program for students.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would expect to see is that be reflected in the financial aid line or some other standalone line, not that it just defrays the total cost of the operation.
I see. I see.
Is
And
Melantina on this call? Is Melantina
is.
or Carrie Kelly
Yes.
on the call?
Ye-
Is Carrie Kelly on the call?
I'm here. I put together this chart. I am Melantina Pusta. I'm the Director of Budget. To be clear, and I'm sorry, Lloyd, to make a correction here, the PAC money comes in tuition because the PAC money is allocated to the students directly, not to indirectly will come into tuition in our revenue, but the PAC money goes to the students. What's in this 232 represents the block grant for the community colleges, plus the developmental education and outcomes-based funding, and the operation support through short-term recovery of 83.5. That sums up to the $233.2 million allocated to City State. So the PAC money goes directly to the students.
All right, so so now I just want to drill down on that a little bit more. I'll say it back to you just so we're clear. The $233 million that you listed in the line 9 does not include the PAC subsidy.
That's
It does
correct.
include the block grant, the developmental things, and one-time. Is this the the ARPA dollars and the other sort of carry forward dollars that might be allocated this year for fiscal year 24? Is also
That is
included in the state aid line.
That is correct. You are
Okay.
correct.
And then whatever we allocate to PACT appears as revenue under tuition and fees because that's a direct subsidy to students.
That is correct.
Right. And then so then further down I guess, so since it appears as revenue, it doesn't appear, the PAC money doesn't appear as an expenditure because it's a net positive, and so there's no commensurate you sort of netted out that dollar amount in the tuition and fee line. Is that what I gather?
That is correct on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, it's booked, obviously, that's a kind of a grant, right? The revenue must equal to expenditures, and that's accounted for separately on the grant side. This is operating ENG only, and the institutional aid, financial aid, the waivers line that you see, that's the institutional aid portion offered in addition to PACT, in addition to PIL, in addition to all the other sources of aid that the students receive.
Okay, that's helpful because one of my follow-up questions was going to be, what is your policy for institutional aid? I can't remember what your target what your target percentage is. Is it
15%?
15%. So when
Yeah.
I did the calculation, that's why I had my calculator. When I did the calculation, the $17 million that you have in your financial aid and waivers, and that's a little bit inflated because it includes a waiver part 2, I guess.
That's
but
right.
financial aid is just 11% of tuition and fees. But that probably rises to 15% when you net out the fees and take out the PAC money. I'd be surprised to learn that you include the PAC money in the calculation of the amount of institutional aid that you also distribute.
That is correct. It's not included on this line because it's separate. It's treated as a grant and it goes directly to the students. It comes indirectly into tuition, but it's not reflected under the expenditures.
So the $151 million is a combination of tuition, of fees, and of PAC money. And if we looked at just the tuition part, the $17 million in financial aid distribution would be 15% of just the tuition part.
You are correct.
Got it. All right. I'll ask other people if they had questions about the spreadsheet. So then I'll ask one additional question. I was looking at the financial aid numbers across the institutions. I calculate 11% for both the community colleges, although I understand why, and 11% for the Charter Oak State College. Is the target number also 15% for the state universities?
Yes, that is correct.
So, and that seems consistent. I mean, so there's no packed money because that's just limited to community college. There's no packed money in the tuition and free line of the CSUs. So $20 million is roughly 17% of 115 million under CCSU. And it's 15% for Southern and for Western. But unless my math is wrong, at Eastern, financial aid is 33% of the top line. And I was wondering if you could tell me why Eastern appears to be distributing financial aid at a rate that's twice what the other state universities do.
So I'll chime in on that, Representative Haddad. It's a good question, and it's something that this is not a surprise to us, and I appreciate your detailed kind of flagging of this. So this has been part of Eastern's recruitment and enrollment strategy, is to be very aggressive with institutional aid. They have a significant body of student athletes, several of whom are going to come from out of state. So they try to be as competitive as possible. And I think they ultimately are competitive in the recruitment arena for student athletes, as well as for other scholarship level students because of this approach. I will say that there is certainly a discrepancy here, especially when you juxtapose that with Western. And it's something that we've been discussing internally in terms of how to kind of reconcile and calibrate that so that we don't have such a kind of wide disparity in terms of how we approach certain things. But, I do think that Eastern's approach has been effective. Its sustainability is something that we have to continue to discuss. And I would also like to just call out that we are trying to kind of amplify Western's approach at the same time, because it seems Southern and Central have a bit more balance.
Yeah, because Eastern's budget, of course, is it's a balanced budget, and Western is under a little bit of water there.
Right.
And it looks like on the revenue side, the big difference is under what you call all operating revenue. What goes into the number that you report for all operating revenue?
So for CT State, you see there's really no other operating revenues. It's very minor. That negative number really reflects contra revenue, which is to say uncollectible payments, right? And so if you look at, it's a small number for Charter Oak, so I'm not really sure exactly what that is. But for the universities, other revenues would include room and board, for example, which would be the biggest part of those numbers. And then other auxiliaries, books, athletics, etc.
Yeah, so Western looks a lot like Eastern, right? Except for those two numbers, right? Eastern has twice the operating revenue from, I guess that would be room and board than Western, and it looks like they invest that difference in financial aid. That's your assessment.
That could well be why they do that. Eastern has had a strong reputation for a long time, and they draw top quality students to their institution, and that's why they're one of the top liberal arts public institutions in the New England states. I can't speak for the campus itself, but it makes sense.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about the spreadsheet? Thanks for answering those questions for me. I appreciate it. There's a question about economic impact. Seems fairly straightforward. I mean, I know in our neck of the woods, in Senator Fletcher's neck of the woods, public higher education is a major employer. I shudder to think where Eastern Connecticut would be without, the employees at Quinnebog, at Manchester, at Eastern, and also at the University of Connecticut. But you go through in pretty good detail about the number of degrees conferred by these institutions and the size of the staff and the salary. Okay. I don't know if anybody had any question about that information.
May I elaborate on the economic impact numbers, Representative?
Yeah,
So what we have given to you are the sort of aggregate dollars that are basically spent on our employees, spent on our contracts, and then the dollars that our graduates would earn that they would also spend. So these, that would add up probably to well over close to $2 billion. But that's, so once they collect that revenue and then start spending, in economic impact analyses, you often have a multiplier. Usually that multiplier is around 1.2, 1.5. The idea is as these people collect their incomes and spend, businesses benefit, hire more people, and so those dollars churn more than just the initial spend from one salary. So the sum of those dollars, I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's close to $2 billion, should be multiplied to get a full economic impact, should be multiplied by something around 1.5 to get that sort of churn. It's sort of the second order spending, if you will, the impacts on businesses hiring people because they get more business.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Then you go into sort of more specific data around job placements and percentages. I'm sorry, Representative Paris has his hand up. I'll see if he has a follow-up question to what you just said.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to see if there were any specific challenges or opportunities that the system might face in terms of expanding its economic contributions to different regions within Connecticut based on the economic impact numbers that you're sharing.
So Representative Paris, I'll take a first poke at that, which is to say that, we just talked about this a little bit at the breakfast here at CT State Three Rivers, where, there was a question about the potential for expanding, let's say, the nursing program here, right? And obviously the overhead and the cost of running a program like that, from faculty to facilities and so forth, is quite substantial. But we also know that it is a high priority need. So I think ultimately, we believe that the investment is commensurate with our output as we continue to also evolve and refine what we do, how we do, and try to be more efficient, more effective, and ultimately have the ultimate impact. So, obviously there are also some potential challenges when it comes to working with industry partners, because they are going to have their own strictures or have their own kind of guidance. One of the things we noted with the healthcare example is that the placement of nurses is key when we're talking about clinical and practical rotations. And so that's, again, another area where I don't know if the legislature has a role to play. I know you're in constant communication with all of these major industries, but I think there are a variety of factors, but we'll be there for it to try to push, and we continue to have those conversations with all the major industries.
I appreciate that, Chancellor. If there's a way that, to the point of the chair, for you all to provide additional long-term economic impact that would show us the, essentially what would happen past the initial 456 million after the first year, I think that would be helpful. I like to see how all of our graduates are faring in the few years after, just so we know what the benefits would be for the state over time.
I have those data and I can provide.
Oh, thanks, Lloyd.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Question 5 was around a job. Any other questions? I'll just pause for any other questions. Question 5 was around job placement percentages, and you provided some interesting information about where graduates, essentially what sectors they're landing in after they graduate.
So what we did with this chart, Representative, is demonstrate where they are going into those industries where I think most people have a strategic interest in. So that's why we have health. That's why we have finance and insurance. It's why we have education, manufacturing. And I decided to add public administration because I understand there was some need for employees in the government too. So you see how dominant the health sector is in terms of where our students, our graduates go. You see that our universities, being the teaching colleges that they are, producing teachers at the rate they're producing them. In particular, Southern and Western are producing, large numbers of teachers out of their programs.
Okay, and I think this is largely a technical question about classification of expenditures. I'm not sure I understand anything about your response to this, so if you want to explain it to me.
You mean number 6?
Yes.
Yeah. When people talk about wraparound services, they talk about all of those extra services that will help students be successful in school. And so we have 2 ways of getting at that kind of costing. We can kind of do it from a ground up, looking at every transaction, whether we had a contract with a food truck or some other social service organization. But the easiest way to develop that answer is to look at what we call the NACUBO categories. NACUBO categories make a distinction between instruction, research, public service, academic support, student services support, and institutional support. We consider wraparound services to be academic support and student services. Those are the activities that we pay for that complement the instructional expenditures.
I see. And then I think I remember this as being somewhat responsive to a question that was asked by Representative Cox, if I recall correctly. Has this percentage, have you noticed a trend over time of this percentage?
I have not. I can access these data and answer that question pretty easily, but I don't have it in front of me now.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of these are base services, like things like the library, but then there are other sort of student services that anecdotally we hear a lot that they're in increasing demand by students on campus.
That's correct. If I may, Representative Haddad, that's correct. It's kind of an evolving definition in many ways, right? And in my testimony, I noted that wraparound student supports equal things such as mental health counseling, such as academic advising, and career counseling. And again, things that the 21st century students, especially post-COVID, are very vocal about needing more and more support in. And so as higher education across the country has experienced, you will see that there have been enhanced efforts to provide more support in those spaces. And just for clarity's sake, NACUBO, if I'm not mistaken, is the National Association of College and University Business Officers. Is that right, Lloyd?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
so
correct.
so these are right. It's a alphabet soup in higher ed. So that's just a new one if you didn't know that already.
When the acronyms get longer than 4 letters, you know that it's increasingly difficult to remember.
Right, the National Association of, that's fine. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah,
this is the group that sets financial management standards for higher ed.
Right.
Representative Paris, did you have a question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'm not going to try to repeat that acronym. I'm going to leave that alone. But as we talk about wraparound services, I really, truly believe that this is the most critical piece for our graduates as they're going into the real world post-graduation. So I'd really love to see or to know, and maybe you already know this, how the expenditure that we have on wraparound services, how that compares to the national or regional averages within higher ed. And where are the areas within the system that we are aiming to excel or make improvements in this regard to the success of students?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Representative Paris. And so one of the things I'll say, which I know, depending on which party you're speaking to, they might have certain feelings, but at CT State Community College, the investment in the guided pathways advisors is really key. It's instrumental. If that's not a student support or a wraparound service, then I don't know what is, right? Having a very fair, healthy, balanced student to advisor ratio that is almost like a kind of academic coach in a variety of ways. And I think that's a big part of why we're seeing the stabilization and even on certain campuses, growth, significant growth in some cases, in the enrollment on certain campuses within the CT state system. I think that's a big sign, right? But as I said in my previous testimony, the damage that has been done to this generation of college students and frankly young people, especially, it is still yet to be determined, and so we are doing the best we can to monitor and track. But we're certainly seeing the increased need for mental health, for more academic advising, and we'll get you more benchmark comparative data to help you make those decisions and answer those questions.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. Next two answers to your next two questions, I think are, have many of us on the edge of our seats. The first one, under 7, was just sort of an explanation of what you've been using, ARPA dollars and other sort of one-time revenue sources to pay for on your campus.
So the ARPA dollars were used for operational support. So in operations, we pay for personnel services and non-personnel services. Personnel services represent well over 75% of our total expenditures, or 70 to 75% or so, depending upon the campus. So the support that we were given for operational support were these ARPA dollars, which are one-time dollars. And so, for example, when CBAC, when we raised wage rates because of this collective bargaining, we were given one-time dollars to pay for those. And we told, OPM and others that these are one-time dollars paying for permanent costs. We will have to come back and ask for the same amount next year. And so that's created a bit of that's created the problem that both UConn and CSU faces. We use these dollars to pay for the increases. And even as we use those dollars, we try to communicate that we would have to ask for the dollars again to pay for the same costs the next year, the year after that, and the year and on and on. So when permanent costs, when salaries are increased, they're increased permanently. And the only way, the most appropriate way to pay for those increases is by increasing the block grant. Otherwise, if we get one-time dollars, we just have to keep asking for it and keep asking for it. And I think the impression that OPM has is that we've just been profligate in asking for these dollars. Really, what it's been is the pandemic, really created a big hole in all of our budgets, all across the nation, across the world, indeed. And it took a little while for us to sort of return to some bit of financial stability. We're still not there yet, but taking these dollars away certainly hurt a great deal. That's how you go from a $26 million deficit in 24 to a $140 million deficit in the very next year.
I see Senator Austin has a follow-up question for you.
Actually, it's not really a question, more of a statement. The right now, the administration and CBAC are doing a
The reopener?
reopener. What is going on, and are you being very forthright on what you would expect them to pay for relative to this?
Yeah, I'll answer that, Senator. Thank you for the question. We've been nothing but honest and transparent about the impact that, from what we understand, obviously we don't know the final terms, but we understand the ballpark. And so we've been using what we've been given to ascertain the impact. And we've been very clear with what that impact is. And we've also been very clear that these are absolutely going to be recurring costs that would need continual funding, so that even though this is, everything's temporal to some degree, right? It feels like, okay, well, we're opening this up and we're going to talk about it and it's 1 year. And we know it is not 1 year. We've learned that through at least 2 rounds of CBAC and all of our experience with the budget so far. So very, very transparent, very straightforward.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, your current ask, of course, I mean, there's, other staff and faculty and students who go to your system who have already modified what that dollar amount should be.
Yes.
But your current ask does not currently include the impact of any possible negotiated increase in salaries at your institutions.
That is
That's
correct.
correct.
That's correct, Representative. Our current ask is strictly for trying to make our budget for FY25. It is not the savior funding investment. It's not the be all end all. It is simply to make the budget and specifically to help CT State and Western Connecticut State University. It does not include the potential reopener impact or anything to that effect.
Can I ask a question? Can you explain to me the difference between your general fund and your operating fund?
Sure, Lloyd?
The general fund, Melantina, maybe you should answer this one.
Yes, my pleasure. The general fund includes all those line items in this under state appropriations, such as the block grant, again, developmental services, outcomes-based funding given to city state. There is a small portion for O'Neill chair, about 315,000. And in addition, there are all the additional operating fund support that are, on the exhibit that summarizes the revenue and expenditures are rolled under state appropriation. But the operating fund includes all the other funds that come from students, like tuition and fees, like housing and food revenues, all other revenue from different revenue incentives and programs that take place on each campus. Like summer courses, like there is a huge list. If you are interested, I can provide you all the details.
I would like that list to be sent to Madam Administrator so that we could all have that. So can you also explain to me, there's personnel under the general fund and then there's personnel under the operating fund. What is the difference?
So in prior years, up to the change in fringe benefits, it was a very distinct line between operating fund funded position and general fund funding positions because the state pay 100% fringe benefits costs associated with the general fund roster. That is no longer valid. Since the fringe benefit change, there is no general fund roster anymore. We get a block grant that comes in our revenue and covers the expenses. So the loss that we've been crying about all along is that we're being shorted by not having at least the general fund people cover 100% by the block grant. I mean, the fringe benefits portion.
Range associated with it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then on the difference between general and operating, you still have personnel on both categories, right?
That's right.
And under the general fund, those are all full-time employees, and under the operating, those are all part-time and adjunct. Is that correct?
Prior to the fringe change, that is correct, because obviously the fringe benefits costs were higher for the full-time employees. And the reason we had 100% full-time employees under the general fund. Okay, so if, let's say somebody were to identify support in the general fund, that would be the lower of the two if we were looking at the two items side by side, correct? You mean if was to identify on the operating fund, right? Because on the operating fund, you have all the lecturers, part-timers, permanent, continuing, student, labor, grad assistant, other assistants. And yep. Yeah. Yeah, all of those, yes. That I'm just trying to differentiate because I think that may happen.
that may be something that we have to look at too. Okay. Thank you, but I would definitely like that list to be sent to Madam Administrator, please.
We will.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about the response to question 7? If not, then we'll move on to question 8, which is, so did we save money when we consolidated colleges or not?
Well, I believe we have. Is Carrie Kelly on the call, Adam?
Yes.
Yes, hi, I'm here. I'm
There she
Carrie
is.
Kelly. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Connecticut State Community College. So I'm happy to respond to your question, Representative Haddad. I think, and in the summary we provided, we shared with you all the varying points in time, what the analysis was of both the gross and net costs of the consolidation. And I think it has varied over time. And we've tried to be very transparent, both with NECHI and our governing board of regents about how much that has changed. But when looking at it in the aggregate, we believe there's been $34 million in gross savings over the period that's occurred from not refilling positions or recasting them at a lower level into something else. And that's a cumulative savings from the period FY18 to 23.
I'll ask if anybody else has any follow-up questions to go first. Senator Flexer.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, I appreciate that you just said that you've been very transparent with the Board of Regents and NECHI in terms of these documents and the documented savings. In my opinion, you haven't been transparent with the Appropriations Committee. So can we have access to those same documents to see the proof of the savings and its variation over time?
Yes, absolutely. So we included links at the end of the document that we provided. So you can see at different points
how
in
far
time.
back do they go?
I think the oldest is FY18. So I think it's been starting. And again, I think there have been different elements. The plan has changed a lot. And, particularly since President Maduco joined and became the inaugural president of CT State, he's made some changes in the structure as well. And so he has changed some of the academic management structure. He eliminated a number of positions that were planned to be created. And then over time, he's revisited a lot of the existing management and executive positions, and he's eliminated 5 regional executive positions and 6 associate vice presidents. There were 18 associate academic deans, 2 associate academic deans that never came to fruition, right? So this has been a fluid plan. And at varying points in time, folks had articulated what the savings targets were, and we've really tried to measure ourselves against those targets. I think the approach that we've taken here and shared with you today is an analysis of all the positions that have remained underfilled or unfilled in the period FY18 through 23.
And do those documents
Senator Flexer, you're breaking up a bit. Maybe when your connection gets a bit stronger, we can
also detail the money that flows from the institutions back to the central office? Sorry about that. If you can hear me now, what I was trying to say is, do those documents also detail the revenues that flow from the institutions back to the central office?
Yeah, that's a really important part of reporting. So both the shared services and the system office, it shows the amount of the appropriation that comes from the state that's used to support those parts of the enterprise, as well as the transfer out. That's the tuition dollars that support the operating fund and how those dollars are transferred back to shared services and system office. And in the past, before the college office was distinctly established, that would be included as well, right? So the college office, which is now here in New Britain, that was part of the system office up until this July.
represent Dathan.
Thank you so much. And I did have a quick look at the sheet, but I haven't dug into those extra reports that you sent. my first question is around the administrative savings. You have estimates there for fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 on page 6, but I was guessing by now we would be able to do kind of budget to actual. I know you said it's a bit fluid, but it would be great to know if you have any variation reports on your estimated savings and what actually you saved in those areas.
Yeah, we're happy to go back and look at that. I think we could probably relabel those as actual rather than estimated and projected, because I'm pretty confident those are the actual numbers. But let me double check and update that for you all.
Yeah, I mean, I have because I'm a hoarder, I have my 2019 sheets that you all shared with us, that I think had a lot of this information at that time. So we can go back and look at those. Those are in my office. But my second question, one of the other things that you guys talked about with this consolidation was the increase in student outcomes. And I see that was documented as part of the second part of the question. But when I was trying to dig in, I didn't see any sort of documentation there about improving outcomes. And again, I only had a very quick look at these documents this morning because I've been running from thing to thing. But on page 5 and 6, I didn't see any sort of increased student outcomes. I thought that was really interesting how you said that 1% before the consolidation attended more than one community college, and now it's up to about 28%, which is great. It sounds like more accessibility, but I was kind of wanting to hear a little bit more about maybe sort of changes in post completion of plans, whether it was, feeding into some of that economic activity that you talked about earlier in our discussion, or if there was any sort of documentation on what metrics you're using to measure student outcomes, and if we can kind of get a better idea on a metric basis how it's looking.
Thanks,
and I'm
Representative.
Mr. Smith, if I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I had a lot of concerns about this, and I just really want to make sure that when we are doing things like this, that we're doing it not just to save money, but we're improving our student outcomes for our state. So I know, the president's shaking his head and he's all in agreement, but I'd love to see the kind of metrics, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. So thank you for that, Representative Dathan, and we will definitely get you those data. And I would just like to say to the group, I'm glad you brought that up, because clearly this current iteration of the administration was not here for the genesis of this consolidation or merger. But when we look back at the data and we look at the measurables of the individual community colleges, there are significant concerns with certain metrics such as graduation, retention rates, and so forth. And so I would still argue, sitting in the seat today, that something had to be done to try to make improvements and advancements. Now, I won't go back and Monday morning quarterback what coulda, woulda, shoulda happened. Right. We are where we are. We have to learn from it. But I would also say that CT State was literally born on July 1st. It has definitely been a somewhat tumultuous journey to get there. And so the level of reporting that we can confidently tie back to the outcome of the merger with CT State as a standalone official entity, it's probably going to be a little bit before we can, tie all of that data back. But let us get you what we can and make sure that we are giving you as strong and as clear and as transparent a narrative as possible right now, because we know that you have to make decisions right now. And so let us do that with the understanding that a little bit of flexibility and grace and context would be much appreciated. But we'll deep dive on that. And as you said, you probably have some documents. We have the same documents, and we'll make sure we match those together.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate that. I just really want to make sure that no matter where you live in our state, that you are given access to great education that is really going to be advancing for your life and your career ahead of you. And just want to kind of verify that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Before I call in Senator Flexer again, I'm going to just say a couple of things. One is I have two other questions not related to this item. So I'm going to ask if you can hold on with us for, maybe 10 minutes more or so. I think we can probably get through that.
Yep.
The other thing I just wanted to say about your response on question 8, that, if I could just be frank, just kind of drives me crazy. Is this paragraph is on, I'm not sure what page this is. It starts additionally since February 23. You talked about the 11 filled positions being eliminated. Tell me, I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. All of those 11 positions were created to support the new college, right? So they're part of the process of creating an administration that was capable of administering the new college, right? I mean, I'm sure that's true for the 5 executive regional positions. I think that's also true for the 6 associate vice presidents. Am I accurate in my assessment that those were new positions created for the new college?
I think that's generally correct, Representative Haddad. I'm not exactly sure of every position, but I think broadly speaking, that is correct.
So this is the part that just frustrates me, right? Like, so we embark on this path. We hire these 11 administrators. We're paying them money through the planning course of creating the new college. I appreciate that, when President Maduka came on board, he saw them as maybe, they're a more efficient way of moving forward. And so we've eliminated the positions, and that's being characterized to us now as an annualized savings of $2.5 million. To me, that seems like the annualized payments to those 11 positions during the course of time when the college wasn't created yet was money out the door that we didn't need to spend in the first place. And so now eliminating the position and saying that's a savings, eliminating positions that we added, so that when we get rid of them at the end of the process, calling it a savings, it's just, well, you get the idea.
Yeah. Representative Haddad, I completely see where you're coming from. And to be quite honest, we share your frustration. And, and again, this is not to denigrate the work of folks who sat in these seats before us. I genuinely believe everyone had the strongest and best intentions to create something that is good for our students and good for the state. But with significant change and turnover, different sensibilities come in. And to be quite honest with you, our budget situation also changed. And so we are doing the best that we can with what the situation is. Whether we were here during the creation of the scenario or not, it is our responsibility to work with it, right? And so, but I understand where you're coming from. I don't think I would say that those positions were not necessary. They were probably deemed necessary by those who created them at that time. And the current administration came to be, and we looked at that, and we looked at the confluence of factors, and we've made decisions, understanding that it's challenging, it's hard, and that we do need to answer directly to you in arenas like this and otherwise in terms of the what and the how and the why. So I'll just simply wrap it and say that we're trying to be as fiscally prudent and responsible as possible without damaging the operations as we see are necessary right here and right now. So those decisions to make big changes to the organizational structure, to not fill or to not hire certain roles, and even in the system office to continue to try to downsize and trim overhead and trim costs and to be as efficient and effective as possible without having to start to really look at in a painful and detrimental way our full-time unionized faculty. We're doing the best we can to try to shrink management and to look at the resources we have the ability to manage down as much as possible. So, but it's not an easy space to be, and so we do appreciate the question though, because that if that's what it looks like, that's what it feels like, and that's probably what it is, and we're just going to do the best that we can with it.
Yeah, I mean, the legislature operates on a 2-year budget cycle, and sometimes I think that we have very short memories up here. I take a longer view. I remember the system before these folks were hired, I appreciate that you see a better way, a more efficient way of managing the new college than what was originally envisioned. At the same time, someone in your office now drafted this document that characterizes that as a savings, and I'm just not sure that that's what that doesn't meet my definition of savings. Senator Flexer.
Thank you. I guess I just have 3 frustrations I'm going to lay out to connect to my next question. One is that I'm frustrated that this administration endorsed wholeheartedly the merger system, which, as we've talked about, was controversial. And I have been frustrated in the past with the lack of transparency around the cost of the central office, and I'm appreciative of the information that's been shared in advance of this meeting and that we're talking about today, that maybe we are finally getting the transparency that this committee has been asking for several years. But my third and biggest frustration, and what I'd like to connect to Representative Dathan's question, is I want to understand how the cuts that are proposed by the administration's budget proposal, how that's impacting the ability for this new system that is now here to be successful. So in thinking about the questions that Representative Dathan was asking, how are you less able to accomplish some of those goals because you're so busy trying to cover this massive hole that our budgets have created for you?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Senator, you're asking great questions, and we definitely resonate with that frustration. I'll say this, I came into this position a little over 2.5 years ago. I thought I was clear-eyed in what was happening, and you always think until you get there, and then you realize there's a lot that maybe you don't know. I still believe that you needed to take a big swing, so to speak, at trying to do better with all of our institutions, but particularly at that time with the community colleges. So when I took this role, and others who have joined me along the way, I'm very happy that they have. We understand that this is a challenging thing. We understand it was controversial. We're doing the best that we can to take the temperature down and recognize the pain, the genuine pain that folks have felt along the way, because this has not rolled out smoothly. We are the first to recognize that. But all I can say is that folks have been trying. We will continue to try to do the best that we can for the students, whether it's through a consolidated, merged community college with multiple campuses, or even if they were still individual entities. I think we would still be having a similar conversation if the student outcomes and ultimately the impact of the education we provide is not where we want it to be. In terms of the transparency, absolutely, we can do better. We need to do better. We will do better, period. And to your question about, there's a real conundrum here, right? Which is that on the one hand, we're trying to live within the budget that we've been given, so to speak. And, it's hard. We've made those reductions. Everyone knows that. And at the same time, we need to try to increase student success, increase impact, increase outcomes. And so it feels like these two things are at loggerheads, and they are. And so all I can say is that we recognize that evolution and change is necessary in the 21st century. We realize that we have to do a better job of getting you the information you need because we desperately need your support as we continue to chart a path forward. And ultimately, as I've been saying over and over again, I hope you don't think it's trite, because I believe it deep in my heart. The shared North Star of what we're trying to do is help students and help these institutions support our faculty and be better. And so I think we're going to get there. I think we have the pieces, but we're still definitely in some choppy waters right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, well, what's going to turn out to be a question and a request for a meeting, I guess, given the time. One is, can you give us an update on your retirement incentive proposal?
Yes, I'll try to be brief. In short, 2 of our 6 bargaining units have signed on. They have been signed on since the very beginning. 4 of our units have not signed on to date. We continue to have conversations with them and trying to come to an understanding and again, chart a path to move forward, because we still believe that this is a good thing. We still believe this is something that falls very squarely within under our aegis as management to execute. And we have been very comprehensive in our study and analysis of impact and coordination of potential activities needed to make sure that high demand student areas will not be detrimentally, suffering because of this. So I believe that it would be a very good thing if the other 4 units were to sign on. But again, we continue those conversations and we'll hope for the best.
Thank you. And then going back to the chart, one last question about your budget, your fiscal year 24 budget chart. I guess I'm still confused about one other thing. Then it says state fringe support, fiscal year 24, it lists $41 million there. I guess I'm trying to figure out what that represents, that number. The new methodology has the state comptroller's office paying for all of the sort of long-term legacy costs associated with fringe, formerly associated with fringe for the system. And you are responsible for paying for, I think, the normal cost. But you were showing this $41 million. Is there's still a state subsidy for fringe under the new methodology? I guess I'm just confused about what.
So let me try to explain. And Melantina, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is why I love Melantina. So previously, the last year, under the normal way that we allocated fringe costs, the state gave us $396 million to pay for $450 million of fringe costs. That left $54 million for us to pay. Now they only give us the $42 million added to our block grant. That was their definition of budget neutrality, despite the fact that it means that we now have to pay $129 million. So yes, the revenue went down to support fringe. The fringe costs went down, but the revenue went down by more than the fringe costs. So now we have, the fringe costs were $450 million in 23. They're now $171 million. The problem is we have to pay the bulk of that $171 million at $129 million. That $129 million is $75 million more than what we paid last year. That, in our opinion, is not budget neutrality.
So to anticipate my next question, maybe we can get through this without an additional meeting. I don't know. So the $41.7 million that you're showing here as state fringe support is actually an increase in your block grant.
That's correct.
Okay. So
as a result of the methodology change.
Yep, got it. That's the increase in the block grant due to the fringe support. In future budgets, that's not going to continue to be a separate line item. That's just going to be rolled into your block grant.
That's my understanding. That's correct.
Okay. The differential that you just talked about is, I mean, like I think I and some others, we're sort of, I'm not going to say I had blinders on or was naive, but I took I took folks' word that the change, which is very difficult to sort of see in our budget, right? That I didn't see, clear runs for all of this prior to voting for the budget. But the promise was, as you just stated, is that this would be budget neutral for both systems. Instead, you're saying that you're picking up an extra $70 million of fringe costs over and above what you were paying previously. I suppose that those costs were being paid for out of the comptroller's office previously. And there's a net cost to you, but there's a net savings somewhere in our state budget. I presume that would be in the comptroller's budget.
That's correct. In fact, Valentina can cite the fact that we got lower fringe rates from the controller than we had before.
And so I guess I'm trying to figure out to what extent the savings. I'm wondering if is this unexpected? Was this a surprise to you that I guess at the time that the numbers weren't working out right when we adopted the budget? That the $70 million differential was going to be transferred to essentially, like, it's really, you don't have fund, you don't have revenue sources yourself. You have revenue from students. That would be transferred to students to have to pay for.
We made it clear to OPM during these discussions last year that this was going to have a negative impact on us. I don't think we could, I'm not sure we told them to the dollar what that we thought the negative impact was going to be, but it was clear. And listen, Lloyd was at the flagship at the time, and Melantina and I were here, Carrie was here, and we were very clear that this was going to hit us to the negative. And, budget neutral to some of our other state leaders in the flagship means, that means the flagship benefits by 20 mil and we get to sweep 20 mil back to the state, right? And that helps the flagship to be more competitive with grants and so forth. And listen, that's great because we want the flagship to be successful, but it definitely hits us in a completely different way to the negative. And we were clear about that, Representative.
Yeah, I want to be clear about something. I don't think that the flagship benefited by 20 mil. The flagship was budget neutral too. The additional cost was taken out of their block grant.
Right.
You have a much higher percentage of your staff being previously being paid for by the block grant, and so the shift impacted you negatively as opposed to the other way around. And so I would have expected that this dollar amount, if we were really trying to achieve budget neutrality, would have been a greater adjustment. My point is that the benefit, which now students are paying for, I mean, the amount that students are now going to be required to pay for is benefiting somebody else, someplace else in the budget. It's not as though the bills change.
That's right.
The expense, the amount of cost, the total cost to provide fringe benefits to these employees is the same as it was before. We're just asking the question about who's paying. And I guess. I'm just curious. I'll look to OFA and others in the future, maybe not on this call, to sort of figure out, if the $70 million that was an obligation that had been being paid for out of the comptroller's budget has in fact already been allocated to other parts of the budget. I fear that the answer is probably likely yes, which makes this a much more difficult problem, obviously, to fix. But boy, this this was not what was on the tape. This is not what the rhetoric promised last year when we were adopting the budget. So,
if I may, Representative,
yeah.
I think it was you alluded to the fact that you heard the term budget neutral, and I suspect that you thought budget neutral meant they will have to pay the same as they did last year. But their definition of budget neutral is not what we paid last year. It's what we pay. Basically, their definition of budget neutral was to close the gap to cover the non-retirement costs. So the total non-retirement costs in the current year is 171. They added 42 to the block grant to pick up that much. We had to pick up the rest. We didn't have to pick up that much before. In fact, we can go all the way back to FY18 when the highest amount that we paid for fringe was $99 million. This is well beyond even that peak amount.
Thank you. I appreciate your response. I don't know if there's any additional questions. Seeing none. If I'm sure you're available if you have any additional questions for you. I'm sure, you know, as we proceed and try to have our decision-making meeting, if there are other additional questions, we'll certainly, I know that you've been very responsive to this point. We appreciate it, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Haddad. Thank you to all the members of the committee, and whatever you need from us, just let us know. Thank you again for your hard work.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.